1. Intro hook start mid-conflict. I didn't say a word when the HOA president stood at the head of the table in the cramped community center, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. She was throwing around words like criminal trespassing and police intervention as if they were confetti at some victory parade. Her manicured finger jabbed toward me like she was serving a warrant. I just reached into my satchel, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid it across the table without breaking eye contact. She smirked, the kind of smirk you give when you think the other person is cornered and you're about to watch them squirm. But then she opened it. Her eyes darted to the header, Federal Bureau of Investigation, active case file. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The color drained from her face as she scanned the page, stopping when she reached my brother's name. The HOA's lawyer leaned in to see for himself, his pen freezing mid-scratch. The room went silent in a way that's hard to describe. Not the comfortable quiet of a calm day. No. This was the kind of silence that comes right before a collapse. 2. Peaceful life. For the conflict before all of this nonsense, life was as peaceful as the lake behind my grandfather's cabin. I'd come here after finishing my military service, looking for a slower, steadier rhythm. Early mornings on the porch with coffee in hand, afternoons fishing for bass, and evenings with a hammer in one hand and cedar planks in the other as I restored the old place. The cabin was a piece of family history. My grandfather built it himself, back in the 1950s, and the land had been in our name ever since. It wasn't just a house, it was a retreat, a reminder that life didn't always have to move at full speed. My brother, Mark, was an FBI agent stationed to states over. His work was intense, unpredictable. Whenever he could get a weekend off, he'd come down, park his truck in my driveway, and spend a couple of days unwinding. We'd fish, grill, and talk about everything except work. We weren't looking for trouble. We weren't trying to be part of the politics or pettiness that came with living in a neighborhood with an HOA. I figured if I kept my head down, paid my dues on time, and stayed out of their way, they'd stay out of mine. Turns out I was wrong. 3. First, HOA abused the spark. The first sign of trouble came on a windy Friday afternoon. I pulled into the driveway after running into town for supplies and saw a folded notice taped to my front door. The paper was flapping, like it couldn't wait to tell me something bad. According to the HOA, my brother's truck parked neatly in my own driveway was unauthorized and suspicious. They claimed a neighbor had reported a strange man walking from my cabin down toward the lake. That strange man was Mark, and the only thing under his jacket was an FBI badge. At first I thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they didn't recognize him. Maybe the truck looked unfamiliar. Annoying, sure, but not worth getting worked up about. I decided to handle it politely. That was my first mistake. 4. Failed diplomacy and escalation. I sat down at my desk and wrote them a calm, straightforward email. I explained that Mark was my brother, visiting for the weekend. I even attached a PDF copy of my property deed, highlighting the fact that the driveway was entirely on my private land. I figured that would be the end of it. No reply. Instead, the following weekend, they doubled down. While Mark was unloading fishing gear from the back of his truck, 3 patrol cars rolled into my driveway. Someone from the HOA had called 911 reporting an unknown male trespassing on private HOA property. The officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, and Mark calmly reached into his wallet and pulled out his credentials. Special Agent Mark Collins, FBI, he said. The mood shifted instantly. The cops apologized and left within minutes, but for me, the damage was done. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was targeted harassment. 5. Strategic turn evidence and legal setup. That was the day. I stopped being polite. I started keeping records. I set up cameras that captured the entrance to my driveway and the front of the cabin. I saved copies of every notice, every letter, every email, even the ones they ignored. I documented dates, times, and the weather, because if this ever made it to court, I wanted the record airtight. Mark quietly filed an internal incident report, noting that an active federal agent had been harassed during a weekend visit. That alone would have been enough to put the HOA in a very uncomfortable position. But I wasn't done. I dug through the HOA's own bylaws. Turns out they had zero authority over guest parking on privately deeded driveways. I pulled county. Land records going back 50 years, confirming the property lines were exactly where my grandfather said they were. No gray areas, no disputed borders. Every night, I'd sit at my kitchen table under the yellow glow of the old ceiling lamp, flipping through documents, highlighting key points, and sticking post-it notes in the margins. The more I read, the calmer I felt. This wasn't going to be a shouting match in the street. This was going to be Surgical 6. The reveal power reversaled 2 weeks later. I attended their monthly board meeting. I hadn't been to one in years. I avoided them like the plague. But that night, sat quietly in the back as they worked through their agenda. When the president got to security concerns, she glanced at me with a smile that wasn't really a smile. We've had repeated violations regarding unauthorized individuals on community property, she began, her voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. I let her finish. Then I stood, walked to the table, and set the manila envelope in front of her. You'll want to read this before you say anything else, I said. She opened it, saw the FBI letterhead, and froze. It was a formal notice citing obstruction and harassment of a federal agent, along with a legal advisory for the board to cease any actions against my property. It also mentioned that continued harassment could result in federal charges. Her lawyer leaned over, read a few lines, and whispered something into her ear. Whatever it was, it made her sit back in her chair like someone had just cut the strings holding her up. Nobody said a word for the rest of that meeting. 7. Aftermath and transformation. They never called 911 on my property again. In fact, the next month, the HOA president resigned for personal reasons. Mark still visits when he can, sometimes in an unmarked SUV, just to fish. Now, when I drive through the neighborhood, people either wave or quickly look away. I'm fine with either. Because the truth is, victory doesn't always come with applause or cheering. Sometimes it's just the sound of silence where there used to be noise. And for me, that silence is worth more than anything.